I lived on this farm with my grandparents, and there was no money. Like he had also a sawmill down the street, down this road here, a short ways, about a mile, and a grain mill. And every Saturday morning, we'd grind meals, or oats and stuff like that for the farmers, or we'd saw lumber for them. And we'd do that most of that day on a Saturday. And I think he did that about every Saturday. So that helped support my father or grandfather. And I don't know much beyond that. I can't hardly remember. We farmed that farm. I helped my grandfather with it. And every day I'd walk to school, which I said was about 4 miles.
Well, can you tell us about your parents? What were your parents?
Well, my parents, like I say, my father got in that wreck, and I was pretty young at that time. I don't know how old I was, maybe 3 years, 4 years, I don't remember, back in them days. And I had 2 sisters and myself. And after that, way he couldn't hardly, he had to always be taken care of. So he was never at home. I didn't hardly ever know him. And then my mother moved from Zanesville, Ohio, back to Parkersburg to be closer to all of her relation, and was working there doing something, I don't know. And then after that, why, my sisters would move with my aunts. One of them was, he owned a grocery store there, and the other one was a riverboat captain. And then I moved to the farm. And this farm was, you want me to tell you about this farm? This here farm was built, that house, for Colonel Buckner back in 1809, as I understand it. And my grandfather bought this farm and had a sawmill put on it, and I moved in with my grandparents, and then I lived there until I was about, I must have been about 10 or 11 years old. And my mother had remarried, and we moved up to Columbus, Ohio, and I finished school there in Columbus, Ohio.
And then after that, you moved to Detroit after that?
After I was in Columbus there for a few years, and my stepdad was a mechanic. And on Saturdays, I would go work with him as being a mechanic, and I learned a lot about cars and engines and different things like that by working with him. And I think he worked for a man, his name was Ernie Wilson. He was on East Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio. And worked for him for a while. Now, I don't have a driver's license, but back then they had a tricycle motorcycle that you would clamp on the back of a car, and you could deliver the car and undo your motorcycle and ride the motorcycle back. Well, I was delivering a car for him. I remember this pretty well. And I was on a street, and a lady run a stop sign and hit the back side of the car and the motorcycle. So that wrecked my car right there, or everything. And I'm standing on the corner, and I'm pretty upset because I don't have a license. And a woman that lived in the house right there, she seen me and seen I was upset, and she says, "Why don't you come on over to the house?" So I went in the house. Well, now the police are looking for who was driving that car. They can't find him. So the man that owned the motorcycle in the garage, he came and picked me up, and I didn't get in trouble. So after I got back to the garage, I never drove the motorcycle anymore because I wasn't of age to get a license at the time. And that's about the history of Columbus that I can remember. And then we moved to Detroit, Michigan, and I sort of lived with my parents there for a while, and then finally I started working by myself as a mechanic a little bit, and different things. I'd go buy apples and sell them door to door and stuff like that. And and later I met this lady. I was riding, I'd go ride a horse once in a while at a farm on the north side of Detroit. And she had a horse also there, and I ended up a couple of years later after that, I married this lady. And from then on, I started riding a motorcycle pretty severe, and this was sort of during the war at that time. And the war was just ending. And that's about the same time I think I got married and everything. I had to go to the Merchant Marine. I know I was in the Merchant Marine for about 2 months. And the war ended, so I left and came back there and started working. And I was riding this motorcycle, and the first race after the war, they had a race there in Detroit, and the Harley dealer wanted to fix up my bike, and I'd go race it. And it was the same cubic inch that they raced, so I thought it would be a great thing to do. So I went to that track, and I didn't win the race, but I did very well. I can't remember. I think I got third. But I made $27. I remember that pretty well. Back then, $27 was pretty good money. So that was the first race I was in. It was like, I'm gonna call it an outlaw race. So then after that, about 2 or 3 weeks later, they was having a AMA race in Marshall, Michigan. And the dealer came to me again, and he wanted to know if they could fix up my bike a little better, and he'd send a mechanic with me, and we'd go over there and race. And I said, well, that'd be great. So I went over there, and they started them classes in the AMA. 1 year, you'd be a novice. Second year, you'd be an amateur. And the third year of racing, you'd be an expert, and that's where you'd be. And it was classes of racing that they had going at that time. So I go over there, and I'm running about as fast as the experts with this motorcycle. So I the guy at the AMA, man, he came to me and wanted to know if I would race with the experts, because they only had 3 or 4 riders to ride in that class at that time. And I did that. I thought it would be great because it'd pay more money. And I got in the race, and I did pretty good again. I think Leo Anthony won the race. He was from Port Huron. And I think I got second, or maybe I got third, I can't remember. But I made quite a bit of money. I can't remember that either, but it was, to me, like $100 was pretty good racing money. So we get home, and I'm home about 2 or 3 days, and I get a phone call from Walter Davison from Harley Davidson. And he wanted me to come over and visit him if I was interested in racing Harley Davidsons. So I thought it was pretty good of a president of Harley Davidson calling me, you know. So I run over there, and he told me to bring a trailer or a truck. And I went over, I met Walter Davison, Bill Davison, I met John Harley. I became pretty good friends with them. They wanted me to race Harleys. So they gave me a new racing bike and all the parts that I needed, and tires and everything. So I started racing for Harley Davidson. And I raced for Harley Davidson for about 9 years, I believe. And I'd say the next time I can remember of changing racing, I helped a guy build a engine for a car. And he was going to race it at Detroit Fairgrounds. It was a mile dirt track. And I helped him build the engine, and after they got the engine built and everything, why, he built the car, and it looked like a pretty good race car. And he asked me would I drive it. Well, I had pretty good connections with General Motors engineers because they lived near me right there. And every time I'd have trouble with my bike or something, I'd talk to them about it and show them what was happening, and they'd help me fix it. And so I went to this race, and I told them I was going to go to the race and be the first one I ever drove. And they went with me, and they said, well, we'll score you, keep the time, because it's the first car race that I'm going to run. And nobody knows me in this organization that was promoting the race. So I get in the race, and I'm running pretty well. And I know, I'm pretty sure that I was leading the race. And they told me it was taking care of me every time I'd pit for fuel. Why? They told me I was leading the race. But they weren't recognizing me, the people that was running the race. So I finished the race, and they showed me, and the Detroit Free Press was there too, and he knew me from racing bikes pretty well. We showed him the record of what happened, and this all happened within just a few minutes, you know, say 15 minutes or so. And they was already presenting a trophy to another guy, and they had me in third place. And we went over with the press guy and started talking to the promoter of it, and he knew. And the Free Press told him that we're going to reveal it in the press tomorrow, that he won the race, or that I won the race. So he counted the money, first place money out to me. And they recognized that I won the race. Well, I didn't drive a stock car anymore for 1 year. And then the following year, I'm down at Daytona Beach, and I met a man by the name of Smokey Unique. And he helped me with my bike a little bit. He says he wanted to work with me a little bit on it. And I get in the race, and I won the race with the bike. I think that was in '53, if I remember right. Maybe it was a little bit before that. Anyway, I won the race with that bike, and then he asked me after the race, he says, if you stick around and help me put this race car together, he had a convertible Chevrolet sitting there that he had raced with Herb Thomas, I think it was his name, had raced it. So I took to help him with the car and we put it together. I stayed there for I think about 2 weeks putting it together. And they had a race in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a high bank dirt track at that time and 1 mile long. So I get up to the race there and I had the fastest time. I set the car on the pole. It was a convertible, by the way. And Curtis Turner was pretty famous racing at that time, and he had second fastest. So we took off in the race, and I followed him in his car. I followed this with his car, and track got pretty rough, I know. And I'm going in the corner sideways, and I hit a hole, and I rolled the car, but it rolled all the way over onto the wheels. It didn't hurt a thing, it seemed like, on the car. And I kept right on going. I finished the race in second place then. And that was my second time, and from then on, every once in a while I'd get a call from Smokey and I'd go and race one of his cars somewhere. And I can't remember how many races I ran, but I ran quite a few with Chevy, and I think he ended up in a Pontiac later on. But anyway, after I get home from that, I've been home for quite a while, maybe quite, I don't know how long, quite a while. And I get another phone call. His name was from President of Pontiac, and it was Bunky Knutson. And he wanted me to come up and have lunch with him. So I go up there, and there was another man in the room with him. So they brought me into the room, and they introduced me to this man, and his name was Ray Nichols. And Bunky told him, and he was the president of Pontiac at the time, that if we would team up together, that he would supply us with cars and finance as much as they could, and we would go race for Pontiac and build race in Pontiacs here in Griffith, Indiana. So I started racing Pontiacs, and I think the first year I got second in points, and then the next 2 years I got first place in the championship of racing cars, and that was in the AAA people. And they're the ones that sponsor Indianapolis, the AAA. And I don't know, I raced Pontiacs there for quite a few years, and finally General Motors quit racing, and I made a little trip up and I started talking to the Chrysler people, and went up to Detroit and talked to them, and we started a deal with Chrysler about the same way. We built all the cars. We helped them develop the Hemi engine, and first we raced a straight engine that they had, a regular stock engine they had. Raced that for quite a few years, I'd say 3 or 4 years. And then we they come up with the idea of this Hemi engine, the Chrysler people, and we tested it here. We had a dynamometer, and boy, it seemed to perform pretty well. So we took the car when we had a Chevrolet race car from one of the drivers down south. He's not driving anymore. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he brought his car to this proving ground, and we tested both cars and see how they perform. And this Hemi engine on a Chrysler would outrun it pretty good. So we ended up going to Daytona Beach with it.